So make sure that you learn what percentage is what fraction. This give you a list of standard percentages in terms of fractions. So just try to understand that and practice on it so that next time onwards doing such calculations will become easy for you. So friends, here is a list of percentages in terms of their equivalent fractions. From percentages, which is a very common question in bank exams, where we are supposed to find out the total salary of a person based on his monthly budget. The given question here is, Samir spends 20% of his monthly salary on house rent, 25% on food, 10% on transportation, 15% on education of his children, and 18% on household expenses. He saves the remaining amount of rupees 4,800. What is his monthly salary? Now, as discussed earlier, monthly salary, which is nothing but the maximum value or the total value, can be taken as 100%. So let us assume that his monthly salary is equal to 100%. Now, let us find out the total expenditure of Samir. So the total expenditure here can be taken as 20% on house rent plus 25% on food plus 10% on transportation and 15% on education of the children and 18% on household expenses. So altogether the total expenditure here is 20 plus 25, 45 plus 10, 55 plus 15, 70 plus 18, that is 88%. So we can say that the total monthly expenditure of Samir is 88%. Now we know that his monthly salary is 100%, out of which 88% has been spent. So it is obvious that his savings will be equal to 100% minus his total expenses, that is 88%, which comes out to be 12%. And in the given question, it is clearly given that he saves the remaining amount. The remaining amount is nothing but 12%, which is equal to 4,800. So his monthly savings are 4,800, which should be equivalent of 12%. And the question is, what is his monthly salary? So here we know that 12% is equivalent to 4,800, and we are supposed to find out his monthly salary, which is 100%. So if 12% is 4,800, 100% will be equal to what? Simply cross multiply to get the answer. So here we can say that his monthly salary will be equal to 4,800 into 100 divided by 12, which comes out to be 40,000 rupees. So we can say that his total monthly salary is 40,000 rupees. Similarly, sometimes the question may be, what is his house rent? We know that his house rent is 20%. So we can say that if 12% is 4,800, 20% is equal to what? And again, by cross multiplication, we can find out the house rent. Or for that matter, any other value can be calculated simply by taking the proper percentage and doing the cross multiplication. So let us now take the second example from model 1. The given question here is, Gaurav spends 40% of the amount he received from his father on hostel expenses, 20% on books and stationery, and 50% of the remaining on transport. He saves rupees 450, which is half of the remaining amount after spending on hostel expenses, books and stationery, and transport. How much money did he get from his father? So again, as you can see here, the monthly budget of Gaurav has been given, and we are supposed to find out the total amount that he has received from his father. Now, as discussed earlier, let us assume that the total amount is 100%. So total amount what he has got from his father is 100%. Now, he has spent 40% on hostel expenses, 20% on books and stationery, and 50% of the remaining on transport. So for hostel expenses and books and stationery, the total amount spent is 40% plus 20%, which is equal to 60%. That means out of 100% that he has got from his father, 40% has gone for hostel expenses and 20% for books and stationery. So which is equal to 60%. Now after spending 60%, the remaining amount is nothing but 40%. Why? Because total is 100%. So 100% minus 60% will be equal to 40%. Now, the next part of the question says 50% of the remaining on transport. We have already taken into account the 40% which has been spent on hostel expenses and 20% on books and stationery. After this, 50% of the remaining was spent on transport. We know that the remaining amount in our case is 40%. So we can say that the amount spent on transport is 50% of remaining, which is nothing but 50% of 40%. 50% of 40%. Now this is like percentage of percentage. We know that 50% of 40 is 20. 50% is half. So half of 40 is 20. So this will be equal to 20%. So we can now say that hostel expenses and books and stationery together was 60% and on transport he has spent 20%. So altogether for hostel expenses and books and stationery and the transport, the total amount spent is equal to 60% plus 20%. 60% plus 20%, that is equal to 80%. Now going by the next part of the question, he saves rupees 450, which is half of the remaining amount after spending on hostel expenses, books and stationery and transport. So after spending on these three areas, hostel expenses, books and stationery and transport, the remaining amount is 20%. Why? Because the total of these three expenses is 80%. So we can say that the remaining amount is 100%. Remaining amount after this will be equal to 20%. That is 100% total minus these three expenses 80%, which is equal to 20%. And the next part of the question says, he says 450, which is half of the remaining amount. We know that this remaining amount here is equal to 20%. And Gaurav says 450, which is half of 20%. So half of 20% is equal to 10%. And which is equivalent to 450 rupees as given in the question. And we are supposed to find out how much money did he get from his father. We very well know that the total amount that he got from his father is 100%. So 100% is equal to what has to be calculated. So we know that 10% is 450, 100% equals to what? So by cross multiplication we can say that this value will be equal to 4,500 rupees. Why? Because 10% into 10 will give us 100%. So 450 into 10 should give us the equivalent amount. 450 into 10 is 4,500. Model from this topic, which is based on calculation of a percentage of a percentage. Let's look at this. X% of Y% of K is equal to XY by 100% of K. For example, 40% of 60% of some value, let us take 3000, can be taken as 40 into 60, that is X into Y. So 40 into 60 divided by 100% of 3000. Now 40 into 60 by 100 is equal to 24, 4624. So this is 24% of 3000. And 24% of 3000 will be equal to 720. So we can say that 40% of 60% of 3000 is equal to 720. Let us now take an example which is based on the concept of percentage that we have just discussed. The question here is, Prerna decided to donate 30% of her monthly income to an orphanage. But on the day of donation, she changed her mind and donated rupees 4,200, which is 70% of what she had earlier decided. So what should be the actual donation as per her earlier decision? Now as given in the question, Prerna decided to donate 30% of her monthly income. That means her earlier decision to donate was 30%. But on the day of donation, she has donated only 4,200, which is 70% of what she had earlier decided. Now we know that her earlier decision was to donate 30%. That means this 4,200 which has been donated is 70% of earlier decision, which is 70% of 30%. So we can clearly understand that 70% of 30% is equivalent to 4,200 as given in the question. Now, going by the concept of percentage, we can say that 70% of 30% is nothing but 70 into 30 by 100%, which is equal to 21%. And this is given as 4,200. And we are supposed to find out what should be the actual donation as per our earlier decision. We very well know that the actual donation has to be 30% because that was our earlier decision. So we are supposed to find out 30% is equivalent to what? So we know that 21% is 4,200, 30% should be what? So again, by cross multiplication, we can say that this should be equal to 30 into 4,200 divided by 21. So the answer here will be 6,000 rupees. So the actual donation has to be 6,000. Let us now take one more example from model 2, which is based on percentage of percentage. The question here is, the price of a car is rupees 5 lakhs. It was insured for 90% of its price. The car got completely damaged in an accident and the insurance company paid only 80% of the insured amount. What is the difference between the price of the car and the amount of insurance received? Now, as given in the question, the price of the car is rupees 5 lakhs. We can take this 5 lakhs equivalent to 100%. That is nothing but the total amount is 100%, which is 5 lakhs. Now, it was insured for 90% of its price. That means it was insured for 90% of 5 lakhs. The car got completely damaged in an accident and the insurance company paid only 80% of the insured amount. Now remember friends, the company paid 80% of the insured amount. We very well know that the insured amount is only 90% but not the total value of the car. So we can clearly understand that the company paid 80% of 90%. That is nothing but the insured amount. So from this, we need to find out the difference between price of the car and the amount of insurance received. So very clearly, the insurance that the person will receive here will be equal to 80% of the insured amount, which is nothing but 90%. So here, the calculation is 80% of 90%. We know that 80% of 90% will be equal to 72% with the help of the equation for percentage of percentage. That is x% of y% is xy by 100%. So 80% of 90% will be equal to 72%. So very clearly the insurance that is received is only 72%. Generally some students commit a mistake here by taking the difference as price of the car 100% and amount of insurance 80%. So 100 minus 80, 20% is the wrong calculation, because insurance received is only 72% but not 80%. And the price of the car, as we have taken, is equal to 100%. So we know that the difference between these two values will be 100% minus 72%, which is equal to 28%. Now this 28% is equal to what has to be calculated. And we know that 100%, that is the price of the car, is 5 lakhs. So from this, by cross multiplication, we can say that 28% will be equal to 28 into 5 lakhs divided by 100, which is equal to 1,40,000 rupees. So the difference between the actual value of the car and the amount of insurance received will be 1,40,000 rupees. Discuss the next model from percentages, which is based on an election between two persons. These type of questions have been very frequently asked in the previous bank exams and it is quite easy to solve. Let us look at the first example. In an election between two candidates, the winner secured 58% of the total votes cast and wins by a majority of 2,400 votes. How many votes did the loser get? So as the question says, the election was between two candidates and the winner has got 58% of the total votes. Now, as discussed earlier, total can always be taken as 100%. So let us assume that the total votes cast is equivalent to 100%. And we know that the winner has secured 58% of the votes. So winner has secured 58% of the votes. Now the most important point here is that the election is between two candidates. So it is obvious that each of the votes will either go to the winner or the loser. Now since the winner has got 58% of the votes, it is very clear that the loser will be getting the remaining percent of votes. That is 100% total number of votes minus the winner's percentage, which is equal to 42%. So 58% has been obtained by a winner and remaining 42 has been obtained by the loser. The next part of the question says the person wins by a majority of 2,400 votes. Now what is majority? It is nothing but the difference between the number of votes of the two persons. So we can say that majority is equal to the number of votes obtained by winner minus the number of votes obtained by loser. We very well know that winner has obtained 58% of the votes and the loser has got the remaining percentage, that is 42%. So very clearly the majority here, 58% minus 42% is equal to 16%. And as given in the question, this 16% is equivalent to 2,400. So we can say that 16% is as good as 2,400 votes. And we are supposed to find out how many votes did the loser get. We very well know that loser has obtained 42% of the votes. So if 16% is equivalent to 2,400, 42% will be equivalent to what? By cross multiplication, we get the required answer. So we can say that the answer here should be 42 into 2,400 divided by 60. We can say that the loser has got 6,300 votes. Similarly, suppose the question says what were the total number of votes cast. So what do we do there? We know that 16% is 2,400, total number of votes is 100%. So 100% is equal to what? So as you can see here, again the question here is about one of the percentage equivalent is given and the other percentage equivalent has to be calculated. Let us now take the second example from the model that we have just discussed. The question here is, in a college election between two students, 10% of the votes cast are invalid. The winner gets 70% of the valid votes and defeats the loser by 1,800 votes. How many votes were totally cast? So as you can see here, the election is between two students. Let us assume that the total number of votes cast is equivalent to 100%. Now as given in the question, 10% of the votes cast are invalid. So very clearly the invalid votes will be equal to 10%. Now from this we can say that the number of votes which were valid will be equal to total, that is 100% minus the percentage of invalid votes, which is 10%. So this comes out to be 90%. Now moving on to the next part of the question, the winner gets 70% of the valid votes. So the winner here will be getting 70% of valid votes, which is equal to 90%. So now we can say that the winner has got 70% of 90%. And going by the concept of percentages of percentage that we have discussed earlier, we know that 70% of 90% will be equal to 70 into 90 by 100%, which comes out to be 63%. So the winner has got 63% of the votes. And now we can find out the number of votes obtained by the loser as the valid votes, which is 90% minus the votes obtained by the winner, which is equal to 90% minus 63%. That comes out to be 27%. So very clearly the winner has got 63% of the votes, loser has obtained 27%, which the total comes out to be 90%, and remaining 10% were invalid votes. And the next part of the question is, the winner defeats the loser by 1,800 votes. So as discussed in the previous example, majority is nothing but the percentage of votes obtained by winner minus those obtained by loser. So 63% minus 27% is equal to 36%. And this 36% is equivalent to 1,800 votes. So we can say that 36% is same as 1,800. And we are supposed to find out how many votes were totally cast. We know that the total number of votes cast are 100%. So 100% will be equal to what? Which comes out to be 5,000 votes. So the total number of votes cast are 5,000. Similarly, here instead of asking how many votes were totally cast, the question could be what were the total number of valid votes. We know that the total number of valid votes is equivalent to 90%. So we can say that 36% is equivalent to 1,800, 90% will be equivalent to what? And again by cross multiplication we can get the desired answer. So friends, this is how you solve these type of questions based on election, simply by finding out what percentage equivalent has been given and what percentage equivalent has to be calculated. And by cross multiplication, we find out the required answer. The only point that you need to be careful here is that because the valid votes are 90% and the question says winner gets 70% of the valid votes, do not misunderstand that the loser has obtained remaining 20%. 90 minus 70, 20 should not be taken as the percentage of votes obtained by loser. Why? Because winner has got 70% of the valid votes, not 70% of the total votes. So we should take it as 70% of 90%, but not 70% of 100%. From percentages. The one very important concept that we need to understand here is X is what percent of Y. Now this particular model is very frequently asked in data interpretation. Now X is what percent of Y can always be taken as X by Y into 100. So whenever we see a question which is in the format of X is what percent of Y, the answer should always be taken as X upon Y into 100. The other ways of asking the same question here is what percent of Y is X. Now this is as good as X is what percent of Y. What you can see here is what percent of Y is X. So the answer again remains X by Y into 100. Similarly, it can also be taken in terms of what percent is X of Y. Answer again is X by Y into 100. One simple way to remember the formula here is that whatever is followed by of should always be taken in the denominator. For example, as you can see here, X is what percent of Y. So that Y goes in the denominator. Similarly, in the second case, what percent of Y is X. So the answer again is X by Y into 100. So as you can see here, whatever is followed by of goes in the denominator. And even in the last case, what percent is X of Y. So of is followed by Y and that Y is taken in the denominator. Let us now take an example based on the model that we have just discussed. The question here is, in an examination, Ramesh scored 30% less than Suresh and Mahesh scored 20% less than Suresh. So Ramesh's score is what percent of Mahesh's score. So as you can see here, the given question, Ramesh's score is what percent of Mahesh's score, is in the form of X is what percent of Y. So our answer here should be Ramesh's score by Mahesh's score into 100. Now, the question says Ramesh scored 30% less than Suresh and Mahesh scored 20% less than Suresh. No way in the question either the marks of Ramesh, Mahesh or Suresh have been specified. So what we can do here is, let us assume that Suresh's score is equivalent to 100%. Why? Because we are comparing Ramesh's score and Mahesh's score with Suresh's score. So let us take the reference, that is Suresh's score as 100%. Now as it says, Ramesh scored 30% less than Suresh. So we can say that Ramesh's score should be 100% minus 30%, which should be equal to 70%. And similarly, Mahesh scored 20% less than Suresh. So Mahesh's score can be taken as 100% minus 20% of 100%, that is equal to 20%. So 100% minus 20% is 80%. Now we have to find out Ramesh's score is what percent of Mahesh's score. The answer here should be Ramesh's score by Mahesh's score into 100. Now as we know that Ramesh's score is equivalent to 70%, we can take this as 70% upon Mahesh's score is equivalent to 80% into 100. So this can be taken as 7 by 8 into 100. And from the knowledge of fractions, we must be able to say that 7 by 8 is equal to 87.5%. So we can say that Ramesh's score is 87.5% of Mahesh's score. Let us now discuss the fifth model from this topic of percentages, where we learn how to find that a given value is what percentage more or less than some other value. Let's look at the concept here. X is what percent more or less than Y, and it is given as X minus Y by Y into 100. So wherever we have a question in this format which says X is what percentage more than Y, or X is what percent less than Y, or sometimes it is generally given as X is what percentage more or less than Y. Right? We'll have to find out how much percentage more or what percentage less. So simple formula here is X minus Y by Y into 100. So like we have seen in the previous model there, model 4, we have looked at X is what percent of Y, or what percent of Y is X, what percent is X of Y. In all these three cases, we take Y in the denominator, and our A simple understanding was whatever comes after of, whatever is followed by of, that goes in the denominator. Similarly, whatever is followed by than, that goes in the denominator here. Let us now take the first example from model 5. If A's salary is 25% more than B's salary, then by what percent is B's salary less than A's salary? Now this is a very popular question, especially in bank exams, right? So how do we solve it? It says A is 25% more than B. Then by what percent is B less than A? We have just discussed this concept, right? X is what percentage more or less than Y. So here B is what percentage less than A, right? So we can apply the formula B minus A by A into 100, right? Now before we actually solve it, one important point to be noted here is, since A is 25% more than B, it does not mean that B is 25% less than A. Many students commit this mistake, right? They say if A is 25% more than B, then B has to be 25% less. Understand, when it comes to percentages, it is not true. See, if A is, let's say, 30 rupees more than B, then B will be 30 rupees less than A. Absolute values, it will always satisfy. So let's understand how to solve this question, right? Point to be noted is 25% less is not the answer. So what do we do? A is 25% more than B. Let us assume that B is equal to 100. B's salary is 100 rupees. It is not given, we are just assuming that B is 100. The question says A is 25% more than B. So A can be taken as B plus 25% of B. Right? We have discussed how to increase or decrease with respect to a particular value and given percentage. A is 25% more than B. So B plus 25% of B. How much is B? 100. 25% of B? 25. 25% of 100 is 25. 100 plus 25, 125. So now we know that A is equal to 125. If B is 100, then A will be 125. So if you look at these two values, it satisfies the given criteria, right? It says A should be 25% more. Yes, 125 is 25% more than 100. But the question says, by what percent is B less than A? By what percent is B less than A? Now, based on the concept that we have discussed, how do we solve this? B minus A by A into 100. Remember, we are comparing with A, less than A. So the denominator should have A. Numerator will be the difference, denominator should have A. Let us substitute the values. So B minus A, 100 minus 125 upon A. What is A here? 125. Now your answer here will be minus 20%, or we can say B is 20% less than A. So that's how you can solve this question using the regular method. But then there's another way in which, without assuming any value for B, we can simplify the question. We can solve the question. So let's look at the second method of solving this question, right? The smart way of answering this question. What do we do? The question says A is 25% more than B, right? So we can say A is equal to, like we have discussed here, B plus 25% of B. But instead of 25%, I will take it as fraction. Now in the second method, we will be using fractions in place of percentages. So A will be B plus 25% of B. We can take it as B plus 1/4 of B. So 25% is 1/4 of B. Now what is B plus 1/4 of B? 1/4 of B? 5B by 4 or 5 by 4B, right? Now if A is 5 by 4B, it is obvious that B is equal to 4 by 5A. Just take it to the other side. So B will be equal to 4A by 5 or 4 by 5A. Let us convert this fraction into percentage. We all know that 4 by 5 is 80% from our knowledge of percentages and its equivalent fractions. 4 by 5 is 80%. So we can conclude that B is 80% of A. B is 80% of A. Look at it. B is only 80% of A. So how much less than A? 20% less than A. So which means it is 20% less. That's what we have got here, right? Minus 20%. So we can conclude that B is 20% less than A. So this is the method where, without assuming any value for B, we can solve the given question. Let us now take the sixth model from percentages, where we are supposed to find out the percentage change between two values. Now let us first understand the formula here. Percentage change can always be taken as final value minus initial value by initial value into 100. Now remember friends, percentage change can either be a percentage increase or a percentage decrease. It can be an increase in change or it can be a percentage decrease of change. So here, how do we decide whether the change that we have obtained is a percentage increase or a percentage decrease? That can be decided based on the symbol, that can be decided based on the sign of the value. For example, sometimes when we take final minus initial by initial into 100, we may get a negative answer. That negative sign indicates that the change here is a decrease. So whatever value we get, that should be taken as percentage decrease. And if we get a positive answer, then it should be taken as a percentage increase. Let us now take an example based on the concept of percentage change that we have learned just now. The question given here is, the profit made by a company in the present year is rupees 15 lakhs. 2 years ago, the profit made by the same company was rupees 24 lakhs. What is the percentage change in the profit made by the company? So as you can see here, we know the present profit of the company, that is rupees 15 lakhs, and the profit 2 years ago, which is 24 lakhs. And we are supposed to find out what is the percentage change between these two values. Now we know that percentage change is nothing but final value minus the initial value by initial value into 100. Now in the given question, the final value is nothing but the present profit, which is rupees 15 lakhs. And the initial value is the profit 2 years ago, that is 24 lakhs. So we can say that the percentage change will be 15 lakhs minus 24 lakhs, that is the initial value, divided by 24 lakhs. So the answer here should be minus 37.5%. And this minus sign indicates that the profit has decreased. So we can say that the percentage change in the profit made by the company is 37.5% decrease. So this is nothing but a decrease in the profit. So the answer here is 37.5% decrease. Let us now look at the seventh model from percentages, which is a very important concept. Here we try to find out the net percentage change or the effective percentage change when there is a percentage change between two other variables. Let us first understand the formula. The net percentage change or effective percentage change can be calculated as A plus B plus AB by 100%, where A and B are the percentage changes in two variables. Let us now take an example based on the concept of net percentage change or overall percentage change that we have discussed just now. The question here is, the length of a rectangle increased by 40% and its breadth increased by 20%. What will be the percentage change in the area of the rectangle? So as you can see here, we are supposed to find out the percentage change in the area of the rectangle. Now as discussed in the earlier model, we know that percentage change can always be taken as final value minus initial value by initial value into 100. So the percentage change in the area of the rectangle should be final area of the rectangle minus the initial area of the rectangle by initial area into 100. Now here, the length of the rectangle has increased by 40% and the breadth has increased by 20%. Let us assume that the original length of the rectangle is L and its original breadth is B. So the original area of the rectangle A will be equal to length into breadth, that is LB. Now as given in the question, length has increased by 40%. So the new length, let us take it as L dash, will be equal to original length plus 40% of original length. Why? Because it has increased by 40%. So this will be equal to 140% of L. Why? Because L is nothing but 100% of L plus 40% of L. That is 140% of L. And this 140% of L can be taken as 1.4 L. Similarly, the breadth, new breadth B dash will be equal to original breadth B plus the new breadth has increased by 20%. So this will be equal to 20% of B. So this comes out to be 120% of B, which is equal to 1.2 B. So the new area A dash, which is equal to 1.4 L, the new length in terms of original length, into 1.2 B, that is the new breadth in terms of original breadth. By simplifying this, we get 1.68 LB. So this is the original area L into B and the new area is 1.68 LB. Now we need to find out the percentage change in the area of the rectangle. So the percentage change, as discussed earlier, will be equal to final area minus initial area by initial area into 100. The final area is 1.68 LB. So 1.68 LB minus initial area, that is LB, divided by initial area LB into 100. And this can be taken as 68%. Since we have got a positive value here, this 68% is an increment. Why? Because whenever we get a positive sign, this is a percentage increase. And if we get a negative sign, this should be taken as a percentage decrease. So we can say that the area of the rectangle has increased by 68%. But friends, solving the question in this way takes a lot of time. Why? Because a lot of steps are involved and the procedure becomes lengthy. So let us try to solve this question with the help of the concept that we have discussed just now. That is the net or effective percentage change. The area of a rectangle is L into B. That means area of a rectangle is dependent on length and breadth. So as and when the length increases or decreases, the area will also increase or decrease respectively. And similarly, as and when the breadth increases or decreases, the area will be increasing or decreasing respectively. That means very clearly the area is dependent on change in length as well as the change in breadth. Let us assume that the length of the rectangle has changed by A% and the breadth of the rectangle has changed by B%. Now since area is dependent on both length as well as breadth, the net percentage change in area can be taken as A plus B plus AB by 100%. So change in area will be equal to A plus B plus AB by 100%, where A is the percentage change in length and B is the percentage change in breadth. So here the percentage change in area can be directly calculated as A plus B plus AB by 100, where A equals to 40, B is equal to 20. So 40 plus 20 plus 40 into 20 by 100, which is equal to 68%. And since this is a positive value, we can say that this is an increase in the area. So the final answer here will be 68% increase. Let us now take one more example based on the concept of net or effective percentage change. The question here is, the revenue of a shop in the month of March was rupees 40,000. In the month of April, the shopkeeper announced a discount of 20% and hence his sales went up by 20%. What will be the revenue in the month of April? An important point to be noted here is, because the price has decreased by 20% and hence the sales increased by 20% doesn't mean that there will not be any effect on the revenue. Do not mark the answer as 40,000 again, thinking that there will not be any change in the revenue. Here definitely there will be some change in the revenue which can be calculated as net or effective percentage or A plus B plus AB by 100%. We know that revenue is nothing but price into quantity. Now as you can see here, the shopkeeper has announced a discount of 20%. That means very clearly the price has decreased by 20%. And a decrease of 20% should be taken as minus 20%. And because of that, the quantity or the sales went up by 20%. Went up by 20% is what? An increase of 20%, which should be taken as plus 20%. And we are supposed to find out the effect on revenue. Now, as you can see here, again, revenue is dependent on price as well as quantity. So, as and when the price and quantity changes, the revenue will also change. And that percentage change can be taken as A plus B plus AB by 100, where A is the percentage change in price and B is the percentage change in quantity, where A is equal to minus 20 and B is equals to plus 20. So minus 20 plus 20 plus minus 20 into plus 20 divided by 100. And here we get the answer as minus 4, minus 4%. So from this minus 4%, we can understand that the revenue in the month of April has decreased by 4% when compared to the revenue in the month of March. And as the question says, what will be the revenue in the month of April? We can say that the revenue in April should be equal to the original revenue, that is 40,000 minus 4%. Why? Because the change has been a decrease of 4%. So minus 4% of same 40,000. So this will be equal to 38,400. Let us now take another interesting question from percentages, which is again based on the concept of net percentage change. Let us look at the question first. The price of sugar increased by 25%. What should be the percentage decrease in the consumption of sugar by a family such that their expenditure on sugar remains the same? Let us first understand what is meant by expenditure. Expenditure can always be taken as price into quantity. For example, let's say that the price of sugar is 20 rupees per kg and the quantity that we have bought is 5 kgs. So the expenditure will be 20 into 5, that is equal to 100 rupees. So expenditure is nothing but price into quantity. If you try to understand, expenditure is same as revenue. Revenue also is price into quantity as discussed in the previous example. But the only difference here is revenue is from the shopkeeper's point of view and expenditure is from the customer's point of view. Now if you try to understand, even in this case, if the price changes by A% and the quantity changes by B%, the change in expenditure should be taken as A plus B plus AB by 100%, as it is nothing but an effective percentage change due to price and quantity together. Now if you observe the question here, price of sugar has increased by 25%. So very clearly A here is nothing but 25%. And we are supposed to find out what should be the percentage decrease in the consumption of sugar. The consumption here is nothing but the quantity. So what should be the decrease in quantity? That means B should be calculated. The percentage change in B or the percentage change in quantity has to be calculated such that expenditure remains the same. Expenditure remains same means what? It is nothing but the old expenditure should be equal to the new expenditure. So very clearly, as there is no change in expenditure, the overall change here in expenditure can be taken as 0% because old expenditure and new expenditure are equal. A is 25, that is the price has increased by 25%. So A should be taken as 25 and B has to be calculated. So this will be 25 into B by 100. So B is minus 20%. And minus sign indicates what? Decrease. So we can say that B should decrease by 20%. So the quantity or the consumption should decrease by 20% so that expenditure remains same when the price has increased by 25%. Let us now take some typical examples from percentages. Let us look at the first question. A student has to secure 40% marks to pass an examination. He secured 75 marks and was declared fail by 45 marks. Find the maximum marks set for the examination. Now, we know that the pass percentage is 40 because a student has to get 40% marks to pass this exam. Now, he has got 75 marks and he failed by 45 marks. So, very clearly, this 40% should be equal to 75 marks plus 45 marks. Why? Because he has already secured 75. If he gets 45 more, he will pass the exam. So 75 plus 45 is nothing but the passing mark. So 75 plus 45 is equal to 120. So we can understand that 40% is equivalent to 120. And we are supposed to find out the maximum marks. Let us assume that the maximum marks are M, which is equivalent to 100%. So this should be equal to what? As you can see here, we know that 40% is 120, 100% should be what? So by cross multiplication, we get the required answer. So we can say that the maximum marks here would be 100 into 120 divided by 40. The maximum marks will be equal to 3 into 100, 300. So this is how we can solve these type of questions by finding out what is the passing marks and from which we can get the required maximum marks. Let us now take one more typical example from percentages. The question here is 75% of a number when added to 75 becomes the number itself. What is the number? So appears to be a little complicated, but this is a very simple question. Let us assume that the number which it is talking about is x. Now the question says 75% of a number, that means 75% of x when added to 75, that means this value 75% of x when added to 75 becomes the number itself. That means the sum of these two should be equal to the number itself, that is nothing but x. And we are supposed to find out what is the number. So by simplifying this equation, we get the required answer. We know that x is nothing but 100% of itself, that is x is equal to 100% of x. So here 100% of x minus 75% of x is equal to 75. So we know that 25% of x is equal to 75, so which is equal to 300. So we can say that the number here is 300. If we can understand the question properly, we need not write the first two steps. We can directly say that 25% of x is equal to 75. Let us now take one more interesting question from percentages. The question here is, in a test consisting of 300 questions, Deepika answered 40% of the first 100 questions correctly. What percent of the remaining 200 questions does she need to answer correctly for her grade in the entire exam to be 50%? So as you can see here, the total number of questions in the test are 300. Deepika has answered 40% of the first 100 questions correctly. What percent of the remaining 200 questions does she need to answer correctly for her grade in the entire exam to be 50%? That means in the overall exam, she has to answer 50% of the questions correctly. Let us first understand what should be her overall performance. Overall, it should be 50% of the total number of questions, as it is given in the question that her overall grade should be 50%. So 50% of the total number of questions, 300, will be equal to 150. That means very clearly, Deepika should answer 150 questions correctly to get 50% as her grade in the exam. Now we know that she has answered 40% of the first 100 questions correctly. So 40% of 100 is nothing but 40. That means very clearly, out of first 100 questions, 40 questions have been answered correctly. So now we know that overall Deepika should answer 150 questions correctly, and already she has answered 40 questions correct from the first 100 questions. That means there are 110 more questions. That is nothing but the difference of 150 and 40, which is equal to 110. So there should be 110 correct questions. So there should be 110 questions that she needs to answer correctly to get the grade of 50%. Now, left out questions are 200. The remaining questions are 200. So very clearly, out of these 200 remaining questions, 110 questions have to be correct. So we need to find out what percent of the remaining questions does she need to answer correctly. So that is nothing but this 110 is what percentage of 200. So 110 is what percentage of 200 is in the form of x is what percent of y. And we know that x is what percent of y should be taken as x by y into 100. So 110 is what percent of 200 is to be calculated. We know that x is what percent of y should be taken as x by y into 100. So 110 by 200 into 100, which comes out to be 55%. So we can say that out of the remaining 200 questions, she needs to answer 55% of the questions correctly so that her overall grade can be 50%.